With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Boyer. Morning, Lorrie.
Good morning.
We are going to talk turkey today. Specifically, we're going to talk about Cargill that has reached a settlement in a class action lawsuit over price fixing in turkey production. So, when you think about price fixing, turkey production is not the first thing that comes to my mind, but that is what this is over.
And it doesn't really either to me, because there are multiple lawsuits that are and have been in effect on this exact topic, and especially in the cattle industry, that is also a big deal. And there's a lot of accusations amongst some of the independent cattle growers that are pushing back on the larger corporations for price fixing for the packer side of things. And it is a big problem, and it is pushing a lot of the independent cattle growers out. So now we're seeing this in other industries as well, although it's not new, but we do have this in the headlines right now on what's going on with the turkey side of things. As you mentioned, talking turkey, I like that. But the lawsuit here, or the settlement, I should say, it still has to go through the litigation process to approve this settlement. But Cargill has reached a $32.5 million settlement in this broad class action lawsuit. So that means there's a lot of different individual or independent farms that are included in this, turkey farms I'm talking about. So basically, in a nutshell, price fixing is the act of having one entity go to another entity, and they're going to declare the price between the two of them. I'm totally generalizing this, and not have it out there in the transparent market, not reflecting fair market value in many cases, or sometimes too little, or sometimes way too much on the what's considered the fair market value. But that's why we have markets. That's why we have the CME. That's why we have all these things on the Chicago Board of Trade. That is all done through a market trade system. And so what this is doing is actually going around that system and having little private agreements. So what they're saying is Cargill has gone around and has done some not so transparent transactions and negotiations that are not supposed to be done on a legal basis here in the United States. So anyway, that I was trying to explain how it's supposed to be and how it didn't happen. And that's where we got to where we are. So this case is a several companies, as I mentioned, that do buy large volumes. So typically in the poultry industry, and you and I even talked about this a little bit ago in our discussion on the poultry rule that came into effect, the poultry tournament rule. So usually when these corporations buy poultry, they buy them in large quantities. Obviously, these are little weighted animals versus cattle or even swine. And so there are several litigants that are involved in this. These companies include Butterball, Hillshire Brands, Hormel, Kraft Foods, Jennie-O Turkeys, Purdue Farms, and Prestage Farms. So it's a lot, and these are a lot of well-known brands that we're talking about here. So it is talking about this conspiracy, I guess, in this illegal price fixing scheme where information was exchanged and these prices were exchanged, which will lead to a reduction in supplies and suppress this competition. And that's what I was talking about, how they're kind of going around the system and creating these negotiations and this price fixing. So again, this is one of multiple lawsuits that is going on here today. And so Cargill essentially has said, all right, yeah, we probably didn't do the right thing, or we did not do the right thing. And so we're going to pay out these people, and this is what we owe them for doing what we shouldn't be doing. So now I believe it still has to go through the court, though, the court for Northern Illinois, to approve the settlement. This is such a huge settlement. It's been going on for quite a while now. Who all exactly it pays and how much, I'm not exactly sure at this time. That is probably something that will come out of the court.
All right, so we're going to take a little bit of time and get into this a little bit more and go into some of the details. We are going to take a quick break right now, and then when we come back, we'll continue talking on this. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back. We are talking about a settlement that has been reached in a case of turkey price fixing, and it was Cargill that has reached a $32.5 million settlement in a broad class action lawsuit. There were many plaintiffs and also other defendants in this case, and you've done a great job of explaining this in the first part of our segment. But looking at it a little bit closer, do you know the role of agristats? And part of the lawsuit was that, well, there was a broader investigation into the use of agristats. And that, from what I understand, alleged to have provided production and pricing reports that facilitated the price setting across the poultry and also pork industries. So AgriStat's also a defendant. Can you explain a little bit more about how something like that can work?
So AgriStats is a pretty well-known company, one of the larger companies. I would say that the best way to explain what they do is they're kind of the middleman. So you have, say, an independent grower, and you have Cargill. By the way, Cargill has 20% share in when it comes to buying turkeys. So that's a
Wow.
pretty significant buyer of turkeys. Okay, so you have Cargill, you have your independent. They need to negotiate a price, they need to go negotiate a deal. And that information is supposed to go out online publicly, transparency wise, for everyone to see, for other growers to see, for other companies like Tyson's, like Purdue's, like Genio's, for everyone to see. It's supposed to be out there and open. Excuse me. And so AgriStats is kind of the middleman negotiator. So it goes back and forth through them. And so they are also being named in this lawsuit as being a company that probably did not report honestly what happened. They probably, in their figures, or I don't know what they reported exactly, and I didn't see that at all. And I don't know that we even know that at all. But what they did was they did not transparently, openly, and honestly defined what the terms of the negotiations were. Now, they might have reported something. I'm sure they did. They have to, but it probably wasn't accurate numbers. They were probably false numbers, or as one accountant had once told me, they cooked the books to make it look good when in all honesty, it wasn't. And therefore the settlement.
And so that's what they're being accused of. Of course, this is all still being determined in the courts and things like that. But this is kind of the background of what is going on and the accusations made in the lawsuit.
Yeah, exactly. So they misreported probably, I mean, this isn't stated, but based on the fact that this is a settlement, Cargill is admittedly going to pay out $32.5 million. I'm sure AgriStats did not have honest reporting on their end, and that's why they are identified in the lawsuit. Now, it could be that maybe Cargill did not report to them accurate information, and they were just reporting what they got from them and not really an nefarious intent behind it. That will all be played out in the court.
Interesting. And so, and again, you brought this up earlier, but just restating, there are multiple producers involved in this lawsuit. In fact, let's see, Butterball, Hillshire Brands, Hormel, Kraft Foods, Genio Turkey, Purdue Farms, Prestige Farms, all named. Most of those are some pretty major names. When you think turkey, these are some of the names that you're thinking.
Exactly. And some of those are specifically involved in other litigation. And back in 2022, I remember this, Tyson actually got dinged for the same thing that Cargill's being dinged for right now. They had to pay out over $37 billion. And actually, I think they were supposed to pay out $4.6 billion, but they actually ended up paying out $37 billion. But the point is that they had to pay out a whole lot of money for the exact same reason. And here they are tied up in this one again.
Yeah, you would think you would learn the first time around. So, all of this brings to mind just interesting things about the poultry industry that I have never thought about before. And the way that the money works in the poultry industry is, first off, it's complicated. And it's not just, farmers raising their turkeys, they sell it to a company for a fair price, and then the companies distribute it out to the consumer. It's a much more convoluted system.
And it seems, I mean, I'm not a poultry farmer. I've interviewed a number of poultry farmers over the years, but it seems like any ag is high risk. I mean, we know that, right? And we
Right.
know that this is so dependent on other factors beyond a farmer's control. But to be an independent poultry grower, it seems to me like it is so high risk because you really are, in this specific case, even shows that you're relying on your larger buyers, such as Cargill or even Tyson, but you're relying on that middle company, in this case, such as Agristats. You're relying on so many other factors outside to set those prices and to get those prices for you. And that's not even adding in political discussions like what we're talking about with trade and tariffs, but also weather and bird
Mhm.
flu and all those factors that they cannot control. It just goes to prove how much I admire our ag industry.
Yes, absolutely agree with everything that you just said. It does bring to mind so much of the behind the scenes things that the consumer never sees and never has to worry about. And thank goodness, as a person who, buys a turkey a few times a year, I don't want to have to worry about this, but I do want to know that our farmers and others in our ag industries are being treated fairly.
Yeah. And not to mention, I mean, I didn't even mention all the rules and regulations that these guys have to abide by and all the health things that have to go on and, antibiotics and treating these birds. And then there is a certain amount of time if you do treat the birds before they can actually go to slaughter because of antibiotics have to get out of their systems. I mean, and then even when we talk about depopulations and things that happen, like all that has to be handled just right. It all has to be done through regulatory control. So then you have all that. So yeah, it's a little off topic on our settlement that we're talking about, but there is, as to your point, is there is just so many behind the scenes things that we just take for granted when we are at the grocery store picking up a turkey.
Right. And, honestly, I'm kind of glad that from a consumer standpoint, I don't have to worry about all of that. But we do need to make sure that, our farmers and everybody are handled fairly. And, also, I'm just not sure that we mentioned it, but this lawsuit started, from what I'm reading, in 2019. And so it's taken a number of years to get to this point.
I knew that this has been around for a little while, but I didn't realize that it was 2019. I didn't know that exact year, but that's it takes a long time to get through these things, right? Then you
It
got
does.
all the lawyers and all those things that are involved. But that's why it's several companies that are all involved in this as well, because I don't think an independent producer could afford all the legal fees that it would cost to get from 2019 to where we're at to 2025, I guess.
Yeah, right. It's a big process. And like you said, there's so many major companies involved. I can see why this litigation would take so long. But speaking of time, we are out of time for our segment. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
We're continuing our coverage of the nomination process for Brooke Rollins. She is President Trump's pick for Agriculture Secretary. Bird flu, biofuels, and the ag trade deficit were all brought up during Brooke Rollins' Senate confirmation hearing. We have team coverage starting with CJ Miller.
And I commit to you today that if confirmed, I will do everything in my ability to make sure our farmers, ranchers, and rural communities thrive.
And that's Brooke Rollins in her opening statement Thursday to the Senate Ag Committee. She was asked about the U.S. ag trade deficit by Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado and whether Trump's tariff policy was the right way to tackle it.
In the last handful of years, we've gone from not having a trade deficit in our agricultural communities to having a $45 billion trade deficit. Of course, that has led to many challenges, including food inflation. And so there are many tools in our toolkit, both through USDA and expanding markets, which are all intertwined, to begin immediately to work to bring that deficit down and hopefully soon get it to zero.
Ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee, Amy Klobuchar, asked Rollins about how she would manage the nation's bird flu outbreak.
If confirmed, how will you ensure that farmers have the resources they need to combat the spread of this virus? What is your plan?
We are hyper-focused on finding the team right now. I'm sure they're already working. I have obviously respected the process and not gotten too involved. But I know that the current team and the future team will be working hand in hand to do everything we can on animal disease.
Klobuchar also asked Rollins about her family's investments in the oil industry and whether that would impact her decisions regarding policies to further grow the biofuels industry.
Senator, I can promise you this. Anyone that has ever worked with me will tell you even to the detriment of organizations I have run, detriment financially to my potential family, that I have never, not ever made a decision based on financial interest ever. And that certainly will not begin now.
I'm CJ Miller.
And the nominee for Ag Secretary shared some of her farm and rural experiences growing up in a small Texas community during her Senate confirmation hearing Thursday. Rod Bain has that part of the story.
Brooke Rollins' prior experience in the first Trump presidential administration included director of the Domestic Policy Council, a council where, as she told members of the Senate Agriculture Committee Thursday, she was perhaps the lone member with either an agricultural background or experience. As the nominee for Agriculture Secretary in the second Trump administration, she provided some of that ag background during her confirmation hearing.
Growing up in the small ag town of Glen Rose, Texas, population then 1,200 people, is where my story begins. Then my world revolved around the future farmers of America, 4-H, and the endless cycle of baling hay, livestock shows, and rodeos that still today constitute the calendar of our small corner of Texas. That experience sent me to Texas A&M on an agriculture scholarship where I studied and majored in ag leadership and development.
I'm Rod Bain reporting.
U.S. Senator from California Adam Schiff was also at the confirmation hearing. Here's an excerpt of his discussion with the potential agriculture secretary during that confirmation hearing.
Ms. Rollins, thank you for being here today. When we met earlier this month to discuss your nomination, firefighters in Southern California had just begun efforts to contain two blazes. As we know now, this was only the beginning of what would ultimately amount to one of the most devastating wildfire disasters in the state's history, if not the nation's history. Over the last 2.5 weeks in LA, it's been difficult for me to put into words how truly catastrophic these fires have been. Just the scope of them is beyond anything I would have ever imagined. Whole neighborhoods and communities just wiped out. The Forest Service has been playing an amazing role in the emergency response efforts, working hand in hand with state and local partners to secure resources and personnel. To aid California's wildfire response this month, the Forest Service deployed 2,300 federal firefighters, 12 large air tankers, 20 helicopters, 6 scoopers, and 8 modular airborne firefighting aircraft. Without these federal resources, the devastation in LA would have been far worse, and we're not done with it yet. We had the outbreak of another fire just yesterday. If confirmed as secretary, are you committed to deploying the same emergency resources to fight wildfires in blue states that would be deployed to fight wildfires in red states? Can we count on you not to discriminate among states in the vigor of the federal response?
Senator, thank you. And obviously, but it bears saying, since you asked, 100% yes. And to watch the devastation in your beautiful state has been heartbreaking for all of us, no matter if we're from red states or blue states. I think that hopefully, if there's any good that comes from this, if I'm confirmed, we can figure out how to be even a better, more impactful resource the next time this happens, and hopefully be able to work more closely, more quickly with those on the ground across blue states and red states.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. Wildland firefighters have been putting their lives on the line to protect my communities back home. And we need to make sure that we continue to encourage people to become wildland firefighters and that their compensation is commensurate with the critical and dangerous work that they do. I was speaking with one firefighter who was, I think, an LA fire department firefighter, not a wildland firefighter, but nonetheless facing the same risks, who told me that he wasn't sure he was going to make it out alive, that there were fires in front of him and behind him. His communications equipment was in and out. Yeah. Water was running low. And he said it was the closest thing to hell that he could imagine. The key, I think, to recruiting and retaining people to do that kind of vital and dangerous work is to make sure they're well compensated. The bipartisan infrastructure law signed by President Biden included a long overdue pay raise for federal firefighters, but that raise is set to expire in March. This means our federal firefighters could once again be paid as low as $15 an hour to risk their lives to keep our communities safe. If confirmed as Secretary, are you committed to fighting to extend the pay increase so that we continue to recruit and retain these wildland firefighters?
Thank you, Senator Schiff, and the tens of thousands of firefighters at the Forest Service, at USDA in our peak seasons, and even now I think we have close to 1,000 on the ground in your home state. I am 100% behind ensuring that we have the best firefighters, the best workforce that we can possibly have to fight these fires. I need to learn more about exactly what it is you're speaking about before a full commitment, but I will commit to this, that in all of my time with President Trump and the 8+ years I've been beside him in serving in his administration and answering the call for this position if confirmed, that he too believes that those who are putting their lives on the line every single day deserve the honor and the respect and the pay that goes along with those jobs. So I look forward to working with you to ensure as we move forward that is happening in the most appropriate way.
Rollins is expected to get bipartisan support. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We'll be back in just a moment. The U.S. Department of Agriculture and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, two federal agencies that work together in a myriad of agricultural, food security, natural resources, and climate realms. It's a partnership that some may not realize exists, let alone what this collaboration brings. Rod Bain takes a look at the connections between the USDA and NASA in this edition of Agriculture USA.
Perhaps most of us are unaware just how connected the Agriculture Department is with the federal agency associated with space exploration and travel.
Climate change and understanding the climate is a key part of our mission. We look at the Earth as like a living organism, and we need to monitor it and understand what changes are occurring, what are the causes of those changes.
I'm Rod Bain. Brad Dorn of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration joins us as we look at the USDA-NASA connection in this edition of Agriculture USA. From studying climatic changes on Earth to growing fresh produce on the International Space Station, there is synergy between two federal agencies that perhaps one would not expect: the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Yet, as Brad Dorn points out,
NASA's been involved in assessing agriculture on this planet since the early 70s. We've been working with people like USDA, farm producers over the years to really understand and provide better information about agriculture and food supply.
Dorn knows about the collaboration of agriculture and space from the perspective of both agencies. He currently serves in NASA's Earth Science Division as Program Manager for Applied Sciences, Water Resources, and Agricultural Research. And prior to that, he served as a Division Director within the Office of Global Analysis for USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service.
I supported the integrating satellite data into the WASDE process.
USDA's monthly World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, in which various information resources such as satellite and weather imagery, field observations, and government data are used to create forecasts and estimates of major crops from across the globe. So what are some examples of USDA-NASA collaboration? Dorn says one involves the U.S. Drought Monitor.
Through our climate sensors, we're able now to understand groundwater changes much more effectively than we ever have in the past. We now provide a data product from our Goddard Space Flight Center to the U.S. Drought Monitor that provides, at the same time step as the U.S. Drought Monitor on a weekly basis, groundwater, root zone soil moisture, and surface soil moisture products for the entire nation.
NASA's GRACE Climate Satellite provides soil moisture information to users from USDA to farm media outlets. NASA also provides open access software and technological products based on satellite data for use in various applications, including agriculture on Earth, For example,
Our Open ET product that we work with irrigation managers that really helps us understand water use so that a farmer or irrigation district manager can look and input this product into their own irrigation management system and help them produce water supply information or water demand information on their crop that they've never had in the past.
media coverage regarding NASA in the food and farm space has also focused on advancements in nutritionally sustaining astronauts on missions. Those remembering the Apollo moon missions and the days of freeze-dried ice cream and Tang orange drink may marvel at the ability to grow tomatoes and herbs on the International Space Station. And Doran believes the interest and research in growing food in space is now at an upward trajectory.
The minute we started getting serious about going back to the moon, getting to Mars, you just saw the wheels going. That we got to eat when we're there, we got to be able to sustain our astronauts while we're getting there. And I can tell you from our experiences, the amount of effort that's going into that, and a big partnership is with USDA in that process. And whether it's tomatoes right now or more sustainable things as we move in the future, that's only going to grow.
Also expected to grow the capabilities of NASA satellites and information technologies to further define sustainable agricultural practices and methods, such as no-till and producing cover crops.
What you're going to see now is these impact assessments. We're going to try this management practice, or we changed crops. Over the past few years, we're understanding the nuances, changes not happening uniformly over the earth. Some changes are impacting different types of crops differently, and some different types of cropping systems differently. Those that rely on snow for their water supply versus those groundwater and those rain-fed all have different issues that they're dealing with.
I'm Rod Bain reporting from Washington, D.C.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
This segment is brought to you by UPL. We're talking today with Katie Driver, who is a technical services manager for UPL in Northern California. All right, Katie, today we're going to talk about fungicide resistance in almonds. So we know that fungicide resistance continues to increase in almonds, and of course this is a significant problem for growers. So what are some of the best practices to help manage resistance?
Right, so yeah, this is something that has been growing for several years in California, and across many of our major pests, we're starting to see this resistance. So like for monolinea, we started to see resistance developing to DMIs, which are group 3s. For alternaria, we have resistance to group 11s and some group 7s. For scab, again, it's group 11. For anthracnose, we're looking at group 11s and shot hole. It's not as common, but we have seen a few one-off cases of fungicide resistance developing. So the common denominator, and a lot of that that I just mentioned, were the FRAC codes. So a lot of repeated use of the same chemistries across the years has basically applied this selection pressure so that we have found resistant strains of these fungal pathogens, and now they are present and we cannot reverse that. So ways that you can help manage that are going to be to rotate, make sure that you're rotating your fungicide groups. So paying attention to those FRAC codes that are there, as well as the group that they belong to, which sounds like it's very complicated, but it's actually a very easy thing to do now that most of those fungicide labels actually have the numbers right there on the front of them. So it makes it very easy to know that, oh, this one was a group 3, now I can switch to a group 9, or however you'd like to do that. And there's a lot of products that actually will contain 2 or more FRAC codes that can help with that. You could also use multi-site fungicides in your program because they are less prone to resistance. And generally just cultural practices like proper irrigation management, pruning to improve your airflow. Sanitation is another big one. So there are ways that you can help combat resistance or keep it from forming. But really the best thing to do is practice product stewardship and make sure that you're rotating your modes of action when you are applying fungicides.
You know, when we're talking about resistance, what are some things that growers could watch for? I mean, obviously, if you see the same problem continuing and it's not, applying your products aren't helping, but what are some ways that growers can really know, okay, I need to switch things up?
Yeah, so Usually you'll see it because you're monitoring and testing, and you can tell that, hey, this fungicide didn't work last year. Something happened there. So one of the things that they can look for is new chemistries that they haven't tried before, or alternative chemistries that they haven't used in quite a while. And luckily, UPL has brought a new solution to almond growers in California with Axios 20SC fungicide that's powered by Kenoprol Active. It is a brand new mode of action that has never been used before in the world. And it has a new FRAC code, which is group 52, and it is the only active in that group. So this is a good way to introduce a new type of control into your fungicide programs that can help combat some of that resistance that you may be dealing with. It can also help prevent resistance from building because, as I said earlier, we've relied on the same groups of chemistries, 3, 7s, 9s, and 11s for several years. And that's why we see the most of the resistance popping up in those groups. So having a new tool in the toolbox to break those cycles is actually going to be very useful for our almond growers. And it's also doesn't have cross resistance. So if you're dealing with resistance currently, this new chemistry, Axios, is not affected by current strains of resistant pathogens that are in orchards. So it's basically going to reset the clock for you on a lot of these things that you may have struggled with if you're dealing with resistance.
So I love talking about products that have a new mode of action because that is so important when not only dealing with resistance that's already happening, but also preventing resistance to change up that mode of action as well. So there are a lot of really good key points to this new product. Is there anything else that you want our growers to know about it?
Yeah, so it is also an EPA reduced risk pesticide. So it is very easy to use from an environmental perspective. It also has a low use rate at 5 fluid ounces per acre, making it easy to handle on the farm as well. And it is currently available. So reach out to your PCA or a UPL rep to learn more information about where to get it from.
All right. And for people who would like to get more information, what's the website they can go to?
Our website is upl-ltd.com/US.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
Wrapping up the day today with some news. The latest look at USDA's H5N1 testing strategy for milk from dairy cattle includes a number of states participating and a level of testing among each state. Rod Bain has more.
The second federal order involving milk testing for a strain of the H5N1 HPAI virus in dairy cattle is now over a month old.
The federal order that we were going to work with dairy milk regulators and through their normal regulatory testing, try to get some samples off of those normal regulatory tests to look for HPAI in silo milk tank samples, as well as potentially bulk tank samples and or dairy tanker truck samples. This national milk testing strategy is a way to get an idea of how widespread this is, how widespread this isn't, and to continue our work towards eliminating this virus from the U.S. dairy herd.
The update on the national milk testing strategy from Alex Turner of USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service includes 28 states enrolled since early January, consisting of nearly 65% of the nation's milk production.
States that are working through different ways to utilize the testing infrastructure that exists, as well as build some of the testing infrastructure if that doesn't exist within their state, and kind of do the surveillance testing to give us a national idea of where this virus is, where it isn't, and kind of where we're at.
Currently, 3 tranches of states have been announced for the NMTS, based on their level of testing.
Sequentially, so we can kind of roll out that national milk testing strategy. Initially, there are certainly states that were ready to go with their testing and surveillance strategies. And part of that national milk testing strategy is for some of the states where they don't think the virus exists, can we build on and utilize existing milk testing infrastructure for the milk regulators? So that is through potentially silo testing or testing milk when it gets to the silos of processors.
Normally, milk is tested at processors for other bacteria, antimicrobials, and antibiotics.
So taking advantage of those normal milk sample testing in grade A dairies, we thought it would be a good idea that if we could take advantage of that existing infrastructure, that might be the most efficient way for some states.
While with other states involved in the national milk testing strategy,
other states have come to us and said, hey, we would like to do a more detailed and a more accurate testing at the dairy farm level and actually test each of the dairies in our state, because we believe that's a better way to get an idea of where this virus is or where this virus isn't within the states.
The strategy also involves 5 stages reflecting a state's testing activity and the presence of H5N1 in their state. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Canada's conservative leaders are responding to U.S. tariff threats. Dennis Guy reports.
Canadian agricultural commodity and export associations are attempting to make a case for a tariff-free trade environment now that a new U.S. government agency called the External Revenue Service is to be responsible for collecting tariffs on imported goods into the U.S. On Monday, the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump's tariff tactic is intended to kickstart talks on the USMCA before its scheduled review for next year. But on Tuesday, President Trump denied that report, saying he is responding to the massive flows of fentanyl and migrants into the U.S. Trump said that U.S. tariff action will probably begin on February 1st, but that action has nothing to do with the USMCA, and that it has to do in part with Canada's drug and migration failures.
Canada, very much so. They've allowed millions and millions of people to come into our country that shouldn't be here. They could have stopped them, and they didn't. The fentanyl coming through Canada is massive.
However, appearing as a guest on an American podcast, former Canadian Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper says that President Trump's assertions about huge amounts of drugs and hordes of immigrants flowing into the U.S. from Canada is simply a false premise.
There is no migrant flow happening from Canada to the United States in any significant numbers. Drugs, guns, crime, most of those things flow north, not south. A lot more flows into Canada from the United States than flows out of it.
In his first day in office, President Trump signed a sweeping executive order on trade policy that included a directive to the U.S. Trade Representative to begin public consultations to prepare for the USMCA's review and to assess that agreement's impact on workers and agricultural producers. An April 1st deadline is set for that report. While the Canadian Liberal government said it is ready to retaliate to any tariff measures implemented by Washington, it could be a Conservative government that implements those measures. Canada will have a federal election this year, and a vast majority of Canadians believe the Conservatives will win that election. Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party, is widely believed to be Canada's next prime minister, and he says that in his view, the U.S. enjoys far too good a deal from Canada's energy sector, which he says is the category that makes up Canada's trade surplus with the U.S.
Our entire trade surplus is due to oil and gas. We export at enormous discounts to market price. Depending on the time, we sell a barrel of oil to the Americans for 10 to 30 or 40% cheaper than the world price. If President Trump wants to make America richer, the last thing he should want to do is block the underpriced Canadian energy from going into his marketplace.
And later in that American podcast, Poilievre's longtime political mentor, Stephen Harper, suggested that Canada should consider selling its oil and gas to other countries. Reporting from Canada, I'm Dennis Guy.
That's our show for today. This has been the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. On behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.